Welcome to Inside Games Daily, the only gaming news show brave enough to roll our eyes at The Last of Us. Yes, that's right. Both Lawrence and I have done that.
So brave. Yes, the only ones to express any negativity about The Last of Us, the world-renowned show and best-selling video game. That's the kind of bravery you get here and only here.
Oh, wait, we'll give you some points as to why we think that. But first, let's talk about the news. All right, so Neil Druckmann actually chickened out at talking about The Last of Us Part 3, the video game. So Variety published an interview with The Last of Us Season 2 writers Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann on March 5th that addressed The Last of Us Part 3, the video game.
Yeah. I haven't heard much about it. Been wondering, especially with the open-ended nature of the ending of Last of Us Part 2, which I'm sure I'll rant about soon enough. I'm going to try to keep myself on a leash.
I can truly say I don't ever want to play that game again.
So when asked about the question, Druckmann said, "I was waiting for this question," while he sighed at the prospect of a third game. Quote, "I guess the only thing I would say is don't bet on there being more of Last of Us. This could be it."
Wow. Okay. All right. I mean, he has moved.
Bruce, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. Sorry, time's up. I tried to keep... Last of Us Part 2 was such a cop-out ending. And of course he has no ideas of where to take it from here because he didn't know where that game was going based on the way it ended. And it ended in the most cowardly way without making any statement about anything. Anyway, okay. There's more in the interview. I can't monopolize this episode. Bruce, yes. What else did they say?
The problem is, by the way, if you're watching, dear viewer, I agree with Lawrence, unfortunately. So you're probably not going to find any sympathy with me either. All right. So how much more television show can we expect from The Last of Us? Chernobyl and Last of Us series writer Craig Mazin, who's an amazing writer, by the way, said, "It feels like we've got one or two more seasons. It's getting harder to make because every episode gets big. You don't want to wait 4 years for a 17-episode finisher or whatever it is."
And I can understand that. Yeah, the production of premium television is getting a little outrageous. It's eclipsing what movies were even 15 years ago. So I can certainly understand as a producer, writer, you don't want to tie up half your working years in one series.
So there's going to be changes from the game Last of Us Part 2 to the show Last of Us Season 2. Mostly because the game had a... like Lawrence said, really, the plot, it's kind of crazy and maybe drawn out and way too long in the tooth. Sort of went nowhere. Anyways, Neil Druckmann said, quote, "I love the changes that we've made. It's a different version of that story, but its DNA is in there. Maybe more than excited, I'm really curious what their reaction will be."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when playing Part 2, which, okay, I'm going to back off a little bit. It's a phenomenal game in a lot of ways.
It is, yeah.
It really, really is. Technically, it's actually fun to play, kind of unlike the first game. Gotta stop with the backhanded compliments, but it's pretty awesome in a lot of ways, and I had a lot of fun playing parts of it. But story-wise, I took great exception to a lot of it, and even at the time was wondering how are they going to turn this into a show? Like, this story, you can break it up episodically, I guess, but it certainly doesn't really have an arc and doesn't conclude nearly as neatly as the first season did. So I'm not surprised at all to hear that they're going to have to make some substantial changes to the story to get it in some kind of TV container or format.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's... I actually, interestingly enough, I thought... we're not into the opinion portion of this yet, but I thought that Last of Us Season 1 as a television show was a practically perfect season of television. It really was. And it encompassed the story from the first game very well, because I think the story from the first game is a really good story and told very well in the game and also in the show. Last of Us Part 2, though, that's going to be a tough one for me to be convinced. I do think if there's anybody that can do it, it's Craig Mazin. Because Craig Mazin is, an amazing television show writer, producer, all of them. They just, made one of the best television shows ever, Chernobyl. Because it truly is one of the best television shows ever. So I have the most confidence in Craig Mazin. And Neil Druckmann as a storyteller is not a bad storyteller. I don't mind Neil.
Yeah, I just think in an effort to do something new and avant-garde, he got lost in the sauce and forgot that, like, what's the point? My conclusion is that, yeah, Last of Us Part 2 just felt like a lot of pointless suffering, which can still be art, I guess, but I get enough of that in the real world. I don't need it in a video game. Anyway, we'll move on. There's one more hot bombshell that this Variety interview has got for us. And sorry to steal your scoop, Variety, but they can exclusively report that Joe Pantoliano will play Eugene. Bruce, do you remember Eugene?
No.
Last of Us Part 2's Eugene?
No.
Although you probably don't remember him because he wasn't in the game.
Okay.
He was only vaguely referenced in the game when Ellie and Dina find his abandoned cannabis den. So we finally get to know the full story of the dude that owned the cannabis farm in Last of Us Part 2, the one thing the fans were waiting for, played by luminary Joe Pantoliano.
So Lawrence's sarcasm here, while not unwarranted, Joe Pantoliano is an amazing actor and has been in just crazy amounts of prestige television and movies. But also, I will say, the best episode that everyone said of the first season of Last of Us was just about, I can't remember the characters' names, that's how much I cared about it, but the episode itself about the two gay guys was fantastic. It was I want to say it was an Emmy nominated either episode or one or both of the actors won Emmys for that. I do have confidence that they can turn Eugene's story into something that is compelling for television.
Those are excellent points. My endlessly cynical and sarcastic rejoinder is that isn't it funny that the best stories are the ones that are told that have nothing to do with the game?
I mean, no, it's not, because like we talked about with the video game, neither of us like that video game part 2. So
yeah, it's got good scenes. It's got decent moment-to-moment writing, but yeah, I just have exception with the entire arc of the game. And I guess just to explain that, because I don't hate the game, but yeah, I don't know, the ending of that game kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Like I said, and this is where I'm getting into I have my soapbox here. Boom, it's on the ground. I get annoyed when art intentionally inverts your expectations for no reason. I love it when it's done with a purpose, but and it was done with a purpose in 1 and very effectively. And it felt like 2 tried to make that moment and stretch it over the course of an entire narrative. To what purpose at the end, I don't know. Because it was just a bunch of like, what is this for? Why is this happening? What is this happening? And then I take even greater exception with the ending, because I read that as they could have subverted expectations ultimately and ended it much more finally at the end. I thought the narrative was driving a certain way, given how bleak and dour and depressing and hopeless it was, only to have our main characters just wander off with their fates unknown, leaving it wide open for a part 3 that apparently may not even happen because Druckmann is busy producing premium television, which that's a lot of work. I don't know that any human being could do that and also write a full third act to a video game. Anyway, I don't know. I think it's a bummer, and in my headcanon, I have a different ending that makes part 2 a much more complete and depressing story. So I'm gonna live with that.
What's the ending? Tell us what the ending is for you.
I think Ellie should have ended with a murder-suicide. I think Ellie should have killed Abby and then herself. And that would have made the ultimate point that the game was trying to make, is that some people are trapped in cycles of trauma, and then it would have fit the tragedy of everything. But instead, he lets her go and then doesn't even if revenge was the only thing keeping her alive, and they kind of made that point a lot, once she realized she wasn't capable of exacting that revenge, that should have been it. And that would have made a much more compelling, final, and I think tonally consistent point with the rest of the game that really like to wallow in misery. But just with like side characters that didn't influence the plot. I don't know. It was misery porn. I think it's one of those things that mistakes suffering for art. And suffering can be a part of art, and it can inspire art. But I think it needs one more step of development beyond just human misery. I
would agree. Here's the thing. I agree with Lawrence almost all the way across all of this stuff. One final point for me, I will say about the video game, is the entire video game at the end, I was told that the moral is, and I also gathered this moral from the story, which was violence is bad, right? Yes, of course. There's a cycle of violence. We try to break it. That's the whole point of the ending, is that they're like, never mind. We're not going to kill each other. Instead, we're going to go our separate ways and everything's going to be fine. I'm not the only person to come up with this. The problem is, it was a 30-hour video game full of violence. That never doesn't make any sense. that they're glorifying the violence in the video game, and at the end being like, you know what? Violence isn't good. I don't like that. That felt wrong to me. So that's why the story itself feels very dissonant and just doesn't resolve itself correctly. And I think Lawrence is right. I think they were trying to just leave it open for another video game for money. The answer is always money, guys, and that's probably what it was.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty generous interpretation of an intentionally vague ending sequence. Hey, if people are taking it and making that story mean something to them, then in that way it was successful art for those people, but not for me. But Bruce, you have a bit of a prediction here. I mean, we were talking before we started recording, and I was fully agreeing with your Nostradamus-like predictions of the movements of consensus when it comes to games, because I think that's an interesting subject matter related to The Last of Us Part 2. You know, some people will insist it's the worst game ever made for varying reasons, as this episode is kind of drug out. But yeah, as time goes by, opinions shift. It's interesting to see games that were once held up as some of the best, people going back and playing them and maybe realizing that they were just lucky or maybe a little early to certain things. I mean, I remember Borderlands 1 we brought up yesterday as a game that was kind of lucky it hit consoles when it did because there wasn't a lot of competition. But you had some interesting predictions about the shifting of the audiences.
Man, Lawrence, the people watching this episode are going to be so mad. They're going to be so mad about all the things that we've said, literally all of them. So the thing that I was thinking about with Last of Us Part 2, because every time I go back to thinking about this video game, I go, this video game was not very good. The game itself, production design, gameplay, pretty solid. But the story, which everybody lauded, I don't think is good. And I do think that is not going to age well. I think in the next probably 5 years or so, people are going to start going back to Last of Us Part 2 and being like, never mind, this actually wasn't as good as we thought. Why did it win Game of the Year? We might start to see those sorts of things. That's my prediction. And then I was also just thinking about other things because I noticed that Star Wars Outlaws was on sale on Steam. And it's like half off right now. And I saw it was kind of had climbed the charts, the top sellers on Steam. And I do think in a couple of years, once people sort of get through their blind Ubisoft hate, they will start to think that Star Wars Outlaws is a better game, like Lawrence and I had been talking about for a very long time. I think it's a really cool video game with really good writing and like amazing production design and like just generally a good Star Wars property. And a lot of people wrote it off. So I think that might, in the next 1 to 2 years, start to surface as a better video game. Again, people are going to hate all of these things that I've said. That's just those are just my guesses.
Yeah. And just to qualify that a bit, I don't think you or I are trying to directly compare the narrative elements of The Last of Us or Outlaws in this statement.
No.
Yeah, they're way different things, trying to do way different things with their their art and their direction. So we're not sitting here saying that like Outlaws does what Last of Us tried to do but better or anything like that.
No.
Just that, yeah, it's a super well-made game. It understands what it is very well and it delivers on that experience. But you hit on another point, especially with Outlaws, that is also kind of related to this show and the way that we do things here, is this interesting and I think growing dissonance between consensus of what good games are and what bad games are, and then maybe a more objective view of what's well made and well formed and maybe what time will be kinder to. Cyberpunk, of course, you had people insisting it's the worst game ever made, and then a couple of patches a few years later, people actually look at it with fresh eyes or give it another shot, and then your assumptions are kind of reoriented. What I see a lot is people going back to the past, to the 2000s, seeing games maybe like The Last of Us or some other Sony exclusives. Killzone wasn't that good, folks, but you don't remember that. But yeah, it wasn't that good back then. Now it's kind of the invert. People get real hopped up on thinking that a game's terrible and just really savoring that kind of bullying experience, only for a few years later to be like, well, yeah, I guess it's good now. And then it always becomes, well, it's good now, but it was bad back then, so it's still okay that I said it was shit. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you were thinking that this this divide is being exacerbated not only by kind of extremist YouTubers kind of playing the field, but even Reddit. You see it a lot there too.
It's just all algorithms. I mean, it's like a bunch of people hunting for upvotes and likes. And I mean, again, I always say this about YouTube and Twitch, especially if somebody's raging every day about something new, like it's making them money. And you have to understand that if you're going to click on those things and somebody's raging all the time, it's making them money because people are clicking on them. So it's this like cycle of rage that happens, and there's a reason that they're doing it, because it makes them money. It's not because they actually believe the things they say. I mean, like, I don't know that I could find something to hate every single day for years. It would be really hard to do. But a lot of YouTubers are doing that. And I don't necessarily believe that all of those clicks and all of those likes are people that actually think that opinion. It's more of just like, we like to click in and see the train wreck. And that's kind of what is happening on YouTube a lot. And so I'm just saying, it's a cautionary. Just be cautious is all.
Yeah, be cautious and maybe a little distrustful of what you perceive gamer consensus to be about new releases, especially if the narrative against a game seems really. There's trends certainly in how people like to gather and hate on games these days. So if that's why somebody's hating on a game, be a little suspicious. To that point, sort of. Hey, it's time for Inside Games to be on your side. It's tough out there.
On your side. I want to do that. On your side.
Beautiful. All right. Split Fiction's out today. It has something called a Friends Pass, and this might save you some money. So the Friends Pass is a free version of the game you can download on any platform. I just got it on Steam. With that version of the game, you can accept invites from people that own the game and play through the whole thing cross-platform. So you can be on whatever platform you want. They're on theirs, but you have to sign into an EA account if you want to use cross-platform stuff. But even if you were with a friend that has the Friends Pass version of the game, you can both play the first part of the game. It's kind of like a demo, but at some point one of you will have to buy it. So, but you can use that. Maybe two of you can team up and split the cost of the game, or maybe you can just find people that own it and ask them to pull you through the game. You can save a little money, play a new release. Split Fiction's out today. It looks really cool. Bruce and I are just about to start it, so I'm excited. And I just wanted to put a little note in here about how the Friends Pass works because I was confused. I had to read up on it.
It's really cool. It's also one of the highest reviewed games this year. It's looking like it might be a Game of the Year contender. And I think it's like the highest rated EA game in like 15 years or something. It's like EA hasn't had a game like that in forever. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to playing it. Shookland, I'm so sorry that this episode is so long. We need to get through. The poor guy's got to edit this in a couple hours. All right. So let's talk about the Inside Games patrons who support our Patreon every single month. And in the spirit of Split Fiction, these patrons are way into science fiction, into sci-fi, Cash Putnam, and Just a Chair.
Well, for these patrons, Bruce, it's all about dragons, wizards, maidens, and fancy swords popping up out of lakes. UESC Battleroid and J Embers87, thank you so much for the support.